Poor girl went to a job interview, not expecting the CEO to fall for her at first sight. The girl knees on cold concrete, her hands raw, her cheap blouse stained with soap and rain. He's scrubbing the tire of a black luxury SUV. Not for money, not for pity, or dignity. Above her people whisper. Isn't she the one who lost the CEO's file? Fired on the spot. Poor thing. The woman in heels scoffs. Honestly, it's embarrassing. But the man standing beside the car doesn't speak. He's the CEO. But he's staring at her, the girl who was once laughed at for wearing red lipstick to her interview. The girl they called the 12th secretary. The one they said would never lose. But as she wipes the last streak of dust from the mirror, she whispers, "You can fire me, sir, but I will repay what I owe, even if I have to scrub it from stone." He watches her out move, and in that moment the coldest man in Chicago forgets how to breathe. Chapter 1: The Girl in Red Lipstick. Chicago mornings didn't wait for anyone. They were brutal, cold, wet, metallic, the kind of mornings that judged you before you even walked out the door. Leah Monroe stood outside the glass walls of Rentec Industries, her breath fogging up the steel and glass entrance like a ghost asking for permission to exist. She adjusted her second-hand blouse, tucked a loose strand of hair behind one ear, and gave herself a tight smile in the reflection. Her lipstick was red, too red maybe, but it was all she had. The heels were borrowed, the skirt slightly too short, the coat, well, it hadn't been warm since 2014, but she walked in anyway, not because she was confident, because she had no other choice. He passed the revolving door and was met instantly by fluorescent lights and marble floors that clicked under her unsteady shoes. Her heart beat faster. The woman at the front desk barely glanced up. "Nay." "Leah Monroe, I'm here to start work. General Manager's secretary." A pause. A long one. The woman, sleek bun, matte lipstick, eyes sharp like judgment, blinked once, then twice. "You're the new secretary?" Leo nodded, clutching her scrawl-scratched handbag tighter. The woman's squite reached her eyes. She tapped on her tablet and pressed a button. "Thank you. No perfume next time," the receptionist added, not unkindly. "Mr. Wren has a sensitivity to scent." Leah's cheeks burned. She hadn't known. It was just a dab. Something soft and hopeful, like gardenia, her grandmother's favorite. He nodded again and walked. The east lobby was colder, glass everywhere. A vertical garden wall climbed behind reception like a living painting. Leah stood awkwardly until she heard the click of heels. Fast, sharp, impatient. Eliza Brandt, assistant director, polished, tall, hair pulled into a ponytail so tight it looked like a weapon. Eliza looked at Leah once. Just once. It was enough. No earrings, too distracting. No perfume, it's banned. And you'll need to stop wearing that shade of lipstick. It's unprofessional. Leah blinked. Eliza turned and walked, expecting Leah to follow. "You're the 12th, she said without turning. The others had MBAs. One spoke 6 languages. One cried on her 3rd day and never came back. Leah tried to keep up. Her heels slipped once on the marble floor, but she didn't stumble. "Why did the others leave?" she asked quietly. Eliza looked over her shoulder with a smirk. "You weren't Nathaniel Wren's type." It would. Leah stopped for half a second, but only half. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline painted in steel and morning fog. It was too clean, too precise, like someone had designed it for power, not people. Eliza handed Leah a small tablet and a notepad. "Your desk is outside Mr. Wren's office. You don't speak to him unless he speaks to you. You don't enter unless summoned. And for your sake, Monroe, we have met your hours." Then, just like that, she was gone. Leah sat. Her chair squeaked softly, as if protesting her presence. Her fingers hovered over the tablet, trembling slightly. She breathed in, steadying herself. She had made it here. Somehow she wouldn't let them chase her out. But the whiskers started almost immediately. From behind frosted doors. Is he's wearing lipstick? He's not even dressed right. We say she used to work at a diner. Leah didn't turn. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took out a pen and began to organize the weekly meeting notes. 30 minutes later, the elevator chimed. And everything stopped. The air changed. Nathaniel Wren stepped onto the floor. He didn't speak, didn't smile. He walked like someone born to command silence, not because he demanded it, but because it followed him naturally. Dark suit, white shirt, watch that probably cost more than Leah's entire education. He walked past her desk and stopped. Leah looked up, startled. Their eyes met. He said nothing, just looked at her, at the red lipstick, the cheap coat, the notebook filled with her neat, nervous handwriting. He opened his mouth, unsure why, but before a sound could leave, he said simply, "You're awake?" "Yes." "The trick. Don't let it happen again." He nodded. "Yes, sir." He disappeared into his office. And yet, he had seen her. Not the way Eliza saw her, not like a burden, but like something out of place. That afternoon, Leah delivered her first memo. She slid it under his office door, as instructed. Her hand was still shaking when she sat back down. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Nathaniel stepped out. He held the memo in his hand. His brow was slightly furrowed. "But Monroe." He stood instantly. "Yes, sir?" He reorganized the structure of the client summary. "I thought it read better that way. I apologize." "It's better," he said. Thank you." He turned back into his office. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself a smile. That night, Leah walked 5 blocks in the cold before catching the train back to the south side. Her feet ached. Her throat was raw from not speaking, but in her chest something warm had bloomed. He hadn't been hired for beauty, or charm, or a fancy degree. And she knew Eliza was waiting for her to fail. But Leah Monroe had lasted 1 day. The other 11 didn't. And as she rubbed her fingers together, trying to get warm, she whispered to the dark train car. "Red lipstick, and he oh, still here. Shop or 2. The 12th secretary. There were 11 before her." Leah Monroe found that out on her second day, not from any HR report or welcome packet, but from the whispers in the break room, the kind that hush when you walk in, then resume like knives behind your back. 12 secretaries in 6 months? She went last the week, and he didn't keep any. Leah poured herself lukewarm coffee from a machine that sputtered like it needed therapy, then took her paper cup back to her desk. Her fingers were still numb from the walk-in. Chicago in early winter wasn't kind to worn boots or worn-out girls. He wasn't trying to impress anyone, not anymore. She just wanted to make it to Friday. Her desk, if you could call it that, sat directly outside Nathaniel Wren's glass-walled office. The CEO hadn't said a word to her that morning, except a clipped, "You're early," when she arrived before sunrise. But she had noticed something. Yesterday she had straightened his schedule, cleared up 4 redundant meetings, flagged an internal error in a budget summary that no one else caught. Today, the executive director's assistant stopped by her desk with a different tone. "Mr. Wren wants these notes handled by you directly." People blinked. "Me?" The woman raised a brow. "Yes, you." He took the folder in silence, but her heart for a fleeting second fluttered. He made mistakes. Of course she did. He stapled something backwards. He called the wrong extension once. And when she accidentally walked into the boardroom 5 minutes before the meeting started, Eliza pounced. "Monroe," Eliza said, her voice like ice, "this room isn't your break room." Leo flushed. I was just making sure the materials were set." "It's not your job." "I thought." "Exactly, you thought." People laughed. Quietly, but enough. Leah apologized, turned, and left. At her desk, she sat frozen for a long minute, fingers shaking over the keys. She typed blindly, willing her eyes not to sting. There was no room for softness here. That's what they all forgot. He wasn't soft. He was quiet. That's different. Quiet girls survive storms by listening to the wind. But late that afternoon, a woman passed by Leah's desk. Petite, sharp-dressed, expensive shoes. Her perfume smelled like money and glass. He paused. "You're the new one." Leah stood, startled. The woman didn't smile. "I was secretary number B. I lasted 8 days. On the 9th I told Mr. Wren I had the flu. He said the company didn't tolerate inconsistency. I left by lunch." Leah opened her mouth, closed it. The woman gave her a tight, unreadable look. "Good luck," and walked away. That night Leah skipped dinner. He opened her grandmother's old recipe book, but the words blurred. "Well, to he whispered aloud. "Am I just waiting for my number?" She leaned against the kitchen counter in her tiny apartment, hands pressed to her face. And then she remembered something. Something Nathaniel Wren had said, barely audible but unmistakable, when she brought him coffee that morning. "Thank you, Monroe." No one else had heard it. Maybe he hadn't meant it, but it happened. A single thread of acknowledgement. And somehow, it get her going. Day 3. The tension in the office was electric. A major investor was flying in from New York. Everyone was on edge. Leah's job was to assemble a briefing document. Last-minute edits. She triple-checked everything. The file, bound in leather, sat on her desk. He'd hand it to Mr. Wren the moment he arrived. But at 8:35 a.m. disaster struck. A courier dropped a stack of packages on her desk, scattering papers. In the shuffle, the investor file slipped off the side and into the trash. And she didn't know it up. Not until 8:23 a.m. when Nathaniel Wren stepped out of the elevator. "Monroe." He stood. "Yes, sir." "Where's the investor summary?" Her stomach dropped. She looked. The desk was bare. Frantic, she scanned every corner. The trash. He pulled it out, smudged, creased. Her hands trembled. He handed it over. I'm sorry, there was a mix-up and..." He looked at her, not angry, just cold. He had one task. No shout, no accusation. But it cut deeper than either. He turned, Oaxaca. The shame sat like a stone in her chest. By noon, the building was buzzing. He's done. He would meow. At 12, now 13, Eliza came to her desk with an envelope. "Return your badge before end of day." No softness, no smile, just a quiet dismissal. Leah walked to the elevator slowly. The glass around her reflected everything she wasn't. Polished, perfect, powerful. And she didn't cry. But as the doors closed, she whispered, "I should have known. And yet, or not yet." He walked back, past security, past the stairs. He went down, not bullet, to the parking garage. Where the CEO's car. Black, spotless, cold. Was she not beside it? He took a rule from her bag and began to clean the tire, 1 inch at a time. Match up at 3, the CEO who doesn't smile. At Rentic Industry, Nathaniel Wren was a myth. He didn't shout, he didn't smile, he didn't lose control. Executives feared him. Assistants quit before they even unpacked their desks. Board members referred to him as the ice wall in a tailored suit. And yet, for a man so feared, no one really knew what he cared about, or if he cared at all. Until Leah Monroe arrived. The day after her dismissal, Leah didn't sleep. He tried, but her mind kept replaying the moment she handed him the creased investor file. His face, unreadable. That voice, low and clipped. He had one task. He wanted to disappear. But instead, at 6:15, Morangi stood in the freezing garage, her breath fogging against the glassy black of his Rolls-Royce. He held a rag in one hand, a bottle of cleaner in the other. No tears, no makeup, no defense. Only intention. He wasn't trying to get his job back. She was trying to repay what she owed. Upstairs, Nathaniel stood at the window of his office, coffee cooling beside him. He didn't usually look down, not at the street, not at the city. He lived above it by design. But something drew his eyes to the security feed. A figure kneeling beside his car. He squinted. The red lipstick was gone, the heels too, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Leah Monroe. He stared for a full minute, then two. Not move. Not understand it. What kind of girl comes back after she's been humiliated? What kind of girl scrubs a CEO's tire by hand in 40-degree weather? He didn't stop her. He didn't call security. He didn't say a word. But he watched, silent, frozen. And something inside him, long dormant. By noon, the whispers were everywhere. She's back. What's she doing down there? Has she lost her mind? Eliza stormed into his office uninvited, red-lipped and furious. He shouted it, causing a scene. I'll have her removed. Nathaniel didn't even glance up. No. He stayed. If she's not employed. I said she stays. Elita hesitated, stunned. Are you hiring her? I don't recall asking for your interpretation. He finally looked up, the kind of look that made grown men sit down mid-sentence. Eliza left in silence. That afternoon, Leah finished the last panel of Crove. Her hands were blistered, her knuckles red. She stood slowly, back aching, and looked at her reflection in the... No one had come to stop her. No one had come at all. She should have felt embarrassed, maybe broken. But she didn't. He felt clear. At 5:00 p.m. as the day ended, Nathaniel stepped into the elevator. He rode down alone. When the doors opened, he found her sitting cross-legged by the wall near his car, wrapped in a worn gray sweater, a bottle of water beside her. He looked up. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He walked past her, keys in hand. He posed. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said softly. Silent. He studied her. The way she sat, the way she held his gaze without challenge or apology. You're not going to ask for your job back? No. You come back then. I gave you my word. I said I'd repay you. He tilted his head. You think cleaning my car settles that? It's a stunt. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement, not kindness. We recognize. Get in, he said. He blinked. I don't think. I'm not asking. The drive was quiet, smooth. Downtown lights blurred against the tinted windows. Inside the car, the silence was different. Not cold. Just phone. Finally, he spoke. You're the first one who didn't beg. You wanted it, but you didn't. No. He nodded once, almost to himself. I'm not rehiring. He swallowed. I didn't think you were. But I have a position, something different. She turned toward him, unsure. I run a foundation, quietly. We partner with schools in low-income districts, help with infrastructure and education reform. It's under Rentec, but no one here talks about it. You're offering me a charity job. No. I'm offering you a real one. You'd be overworked, underpaid, respected. He stared at him. Why? Why her? But before she could ask, he added, You don't fold under pressure. You keep your word, and you're not afraid of silence. I don't need a secretary, I need someone who can listen. Leah looked out the window. The city blurred past, her heart pounding. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. The next morning, Leah stepped into a new office, smaller, tucked beside a quiet wing of the building. No glass, no whispers, just a desk, a nameplate, and a mission. Nathaniel walked in just once that day, handed her a folder and said, I trust you. No fanfare, no instructions. She didn't need any. Chapter 4. The Suit and the Scar. I remember the day he gave me the suit. Not because it was expensive, I couldn't tell brands if you paid me, but because of the way it seemed to belong to him, like he hadn't chosen it off a rack, but had been stitched into it from birth. Clean lines, dark charcoal, subtle details. And when he walked, the fabric didn't move ahead of him. It followed. He took knock that morning, just appeared at my desk, holding a paper bag. No words, no greeting, just that familiar gaze, calm, unreadable, but somehow always watching more than it let on. He set the bag down gently. He looked at it, then looked up at him. "You represent me now," he said. That was all. Not a compliment, not even a command, just a fact. He nodded even though my throat tightened. He turned and walked away, and I sat there for nearly 2 minutes staring at the bag like it might vanish if I touched it. No one had ever bought me clothes before. But later that night I opened it in the quiet of my tiny apartment. My hands moved slow, careful. Inside was a mid-hue dress, soft to the touch, tailored but modest. No logos, no glitter, just clean elegance. There was a pair of beige flats tucked in neatly, along with a small card, not typed but written in clean, slanted handwriting. "You won't let them think you're small." I sat there with the card in my lap, the dress folded across my knees, and I didn't know if I wanted to cry or smile. He hadn't bought me something to make me beautiful. He'd bought me something to remind me that I already was. The next morning I wore it. I didn't expect anything, but when I walked into the building I noticed the change before I even made it to my floor. A second longer glance from the receptionist, a nod from the man who usually looked past me. Not approval, not kindness, just acknowledgement. Like he'd gone from invisible to quietly inconvenient. A few people looked me over, subtle but sharp. I could feel the judgment behind their lashes. Oh, she thinks she's someone now. New shoes, new girl. But when he passed him, when Nathaniel looked up from his tablet and his eyes met mine, he didn't scan, he didn't assess. He simply nodded, and though he smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes. Later that day he brought him a report. He took it without speaking as usual, but as he reached for the folder, the cuff of his sleeve slid back for a second, just long enough for me to see it. A scar, thin, pale, right at the bend of his wrist. It wasn't large, but it didn't belong to someone like him, not to the man who never cracked, never stumbled, never showed even a second of discomfort. He noticed me looking and without a word pulled his sleeve down. We didn't speak about it, but something changed. Not in him. That even when I was packing up, he stopped by my desk again. "Not good at explaining things," he said suddenly, almost awkwardly. I paused, surprised. "You don't have to, His eyes flicked toward me, still quiet, still measured, but something else lingered there, something like, and then he said, almost like it hurt to say it, "You looked like yourself today," which he didn't understand at first. But I think I do now. The suit wasn't a favor, it wasn't a gift, it wasn't some billionaire's way of fixing a poor girl. It was a message. I see you. Even when no one else does. Even when you forget. And that night when I took off the dress and folded it carefully over the back of my chair, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Caton. I didn't look different because of the dress. It looked different because someone finally believed I could. And somehow that was the beginning of everything. Chapter 5. The mistake that caused everything. It didn't happen in some dramatic blaze of error. There was no alarm bell, no shouting, no crash. Just a single moment, a slip, and the sound of a door closing before I even realized I'd let it open. The file was supposed to be simple. A routine report for an investor review. Nothing confidential, nothing sensitive, just tidy summaries, a few updates, and Nathaniel's notes at the end. I'd handled dozens of them before. I knew the format, I knew the process, I knew how much he trusted me to get it right. But he hadn't slept the night before. My grandmother had fallen. Nothing serious, just a sprain, the doctors said, but it had been enough to keep me awake, pacing in a waiting room with vending machine coffee and a heart full of guilt. I arrived at the office just after sunrise, still in yesterday's blouse, still trying to convince myself I was okay. I wasn't, and that's the worst part. I thought I was fine. I thought I could handle it. I didn't double-check the attachments. I didn't reproof the headers. I sent the file to Nathaniel before the meeting, tucked the hard copy in a leather folder, and watched it disappear into the glass conference room like every other day. It was only when I heard Elisa's voice rise, not loud, but sharp enough to crack something inside me, that I knew something was wrong. "What is this?" she snapped, and I knew immediately she had the folder in her hands. Where's the actual quarterly draft? This is outdated. I'm slow. I opened my laptop, my fingers moved fast. Too fast. I searched, scrolled, clicked through files. There it was, the updated version, untouched, sitting in the wrong folder. He'd sent the wrong one. My chest collapsed in on itself. My hands felt cold. "Leah," came Nathaniel's voice, even and low from the head of the table. He didn't need to say more. I stood. He couldn't speak. He didn't look at me, with anger. Not yet. Just disappointment, the kind that slices quieter than rage ever could. I left the meeting room without a sound. Back at my desk, I sat in silence. No one said anything directly to me, but the air around me changed. You can always tell when people are talking about you in their heads. There's a stiffness to the way they pass your chair, a delay in their footsteps, a curiosity wrapped in silence. A few minutes later, he saw the email. From H. Please report to the third-floor conference room by 2:00 p.m. for an exit interview. Exit. I knew what it meant. They didn't even have to say it. Elisa came to my desk not long after. Her heels clicked louder than usual. Her voice was sugar-laced, but every word carried a sting. These things happen, Monroe. Of course, when you're that far out of your depth, it's only a matter of time. He paused, then added with a smirk, 13's always been an unlucky number. You couldn't respond. I just nodded, picked up my things, and started to shut down the computer. Slowly, methodically, like maybe if I moved gently enough, I could undo it all. But there's no undoing a moment that already happened. I walked out just out after sunset. The building behind me gleamed under the city lights. The very same building I once looked up at with a chest full of hope, as if something inside those floors could save me. And yet it had spit me out. My reflection in the glass wasn't the same girl who walked in weeks ago with chipped lipstick and trembling hands. This girl looked, not in the tired way, in the heart. I should have gone home. But I didn't. I took the train 2 stops too far, got off, walked 3 blocks without thinking, then turned into the alley beside the underground garage. I found his car the way I always had, sleek, spotless, untouchable. And I knelt beside it, breathing, not to fix anything. I just needed to do something with my hands, something quiet, something that felt like atonement. I pulled out the cloth from my bag and wiped the dust off the front wheel. My fingers were shaking, but I didn't yell. Someone had to clean up the mess I'd made. If not on paper, then at least here. I don't know how long I stayed down there. Long enough for my knees to ache, long enough for the chill to crawl up my sleeves. When the security guard passed by, he looked confused but didn't stop me. Maybe he knew. Maybe they all did. And maybe I didn't care. The next morning my phone lit up with texts, none from Nathaniel. I didn't expect any. I sat at the kitchen table in silence, my grandmother watching me with the quiet concern of someone who's seen too much life to ask too many questions. I lost the job, I finally said. He nodded once. Then you start again. I ruined everything. No, she said, reaching for my hand. You made a mistake, and you showed up anyway. That's not the same. But what she didn't understand was I hadn't just ruined a job. I'd broken something sacred, not just in the company but in that unspoken trust that had slowly been forming between Nathaniel and me. The window closed. The quiet recognition, the silent nods. The mornings when he didn't ask how I was but handed me my coffee before I could reach for it, like he already knew. That fragile, blooming thing had shattered. Because of me. I pressed my palms to the table. There was no fixing it. But maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to honor what had been given, even if it was gone. Chapter 6. A depth of dignity. It wasn't about the job anymore. Yet ready? By the time I reached the Rentec building that morning, I wasn't hoping to be reinstated or forgiven. I wasn't even hoping to be noticed. I just needed to leave knowing I had given something back. Repay the debt. Not the salary. Not the suit. That fragile, quiet belief someone had dared to place in me. A girl with nothing but a used resume and red lipstick. He wore it, and not Dane. No lipstick, no borrowed blazer. Only a plain sweater, worn thin at the cuffs, and the same scuffed flats I'd walked in with on my first day. The revolving doors hissed open, and I stepped through them one last time. No badge. No access. But the guard at the desk, the same one who once looked through me, didn't stop. I think he knew. The elevator doors closed around me in silence. I didn't press the top floor. I didn't dare. Instead, I rode down into the garage. His car. That sleek black ghost of metal and glass that had seen me come undone before. I knelt beside it, again. My knees met the cold concrete, and this time I didn't flinch. I pulled out a cloth from my bag, dampened it from a water bottle, and began to clean the chrome wheels. Slow, careful, one swipe at a time. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. There was no audience here. Only me, and the echo of my own guilt. I thought I was alone, until I heard the sound of leather soles on stuff. I froze, cloth still in hand, my fingers wrapped tight around the fabric. He stood behind me. I didn't have to look up. I knew it was him. Nathaniel Wren didn't need to sculpt to be felt. He was presence, precision, silence shaped into a man. But the silence felt different. A titan. I stood slowly, brushing off my knees, avoiding his eyes. I didn't come here to beg, I said quietly. He said nothing. I know I made a mistake. I know I don't deserve to be here. But I gave you my word, and that matters to me, even if it doesn't to anyone else. He stilled nothing. I kept my voice steady, even though something inside me was beginning to crack. He said I'd repay what you gave me. Finally he spoke. You think cleaning my car covers that? I looked at him then, really looked. The CEO, not the man in the photo. Just the man. He'd got it confused by a woman on his knees in front of his car, with nothing to gain. Knew, I whispered, I think nothing ever will, but I needed to try. There was a long silence. I watched him as he stepped closer. He didn't look angry. He looked like he'd just done something he didn't have a category for. And then he said the last thing I expected. Come with me. We didn't go up staring. We didn't speak in offices or under fluorescent lights. He took me to the back lot, where the city noise faded and only wind and distance remained. He leaned against the hood of his car, hands in his pockets. For a long while neither of us said a word. Then Faraghi looked over at me. You're the first person who's ever come back. He swallowed, and I couldn't sleep knowing I walked away without making it right. You didn't walk away. You were pushed. I still lost it. His voice was softer now, almost like a confession. I looked at him unsure, and then he rolled back his sleeve. The scar I'd glimpsed before, thin and white, like a memory carved into skin, caught the morning light. Our crash, years ago, my fault. My brother was in the passenger seat. I posed. He would give it. He didn't. He made a mistake, 1 second of carelessness, and I buried myself in silence ever since. His eyes met mine. But you made a mistake, and you showed up. I felt something press behind my ribs. A weight, a warmth. Leah, that says more about who you are than anything in your resume. He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough that I could feel the shift in the air. I'm not offering your job back. That role doesn't fit you anymore. He nodded. I understood. But there's something else. He handed me a small folder. Inside, documents. A contract. A letter with my name printed in bold. Rent. Foundation. Field liaison. Education outreach. It wasn't just a job. It was purpose. And it had my name on it. I looked at him stunned. He didn't smile. But his voice softened. People like you don't belong behind desks. You belong where things change. I blinked, too full to speak. And for what it's worth, he added, glancing at the cloth still in my hand, you missed a spot. He laughed then. The kind of laugh that holds tears just beneath it. He smiled. Not fully, but for Nathaniel Wren, that was everything. That night he stood on my tiny balcony. The city humming below. Had nothing figured out. He still had bills. He still had fears. But I had this, a new chapter I didn't beg for but earned in the quietest way I knew how. By saying it. By showing up. By keeping my dignity even when the world tried to strip it away. And as I stood under the evening sky, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, I whispered to no one. I didn't call. I learned how to kneel, without breaking. Chapter 7, The Silence Between Us. There's a kind of silence that screams. Not the silence of empty rooms or unanswered calls. But the silence between two people who have seen each other at their worst, stayed anyway. That's the silence that lived between us now. After the file, after the garage, after the car and the cloth, and the way he looked at me like I'd rewritten the rules. He didn't bring me Gladys, he was his secretary. He brought me in as something else. A liaison, he called it, a bridge between Rentec's name and the communities it claimed to serve. Outreach, foundation work, schools, food programs, all the things buried deep beneath the brand. This department doesn't make us money, he said. It makes us matter. And I understood. He wasn't just building a company anymore. He was trying to build a legacy he could live with. And somehow he wanted me to be part of that. We didn't speak much that first week. He sent emails. I responded. He left notes on my desk in clipped handwriting. I left updates and clean binders on his table. No conversation. No Scott talk. Just the steady rhythm of tasks, exchanged through paper and passing glances. But the silence was different now. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. There was a day, Thursday I think, when I brought him a proposal for a scholarship pilot in the South Side. It was a simple pitch. Clear numbers, impact projections, nothing fancy. He didn't say anything as he reread it, he just nodded once and closed the file. I stood awkwardly by the door, waiting for him to dismiss me like always. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back slightly and asked. It was the first personal question he'd asked me since everything. I hesitated, because I didn't know. But because saying it out loud made it real. Because it saved me, I said softly. He didn't, but just looked at me with those unreadable eyes. And in that moment I saw something soften. Not though. Just Lord Scudder. The next day I brought coffee. Not because he asked. But because I remembered the way he used to take it, 2 creams, no sugar. When he placed it on his desk, he looked up, surprised. What's this? He smiled. Just keeping old habits. He stared at the cup, like it held more than coffee. And then, for the first time in weeks, he smiled. Apparently there. But it weak his eyes as he put. That's how he existed now. In moments. Shared silence, quiet gestures, glances that lingered one. He never touched me. Never. He never crossed a line. But I knew, and I think he did too. That something had begun to bloom in the space between us. And it was fragile. Still unknown, but real. One evening I stayed late. The building had emptied, the lights dimmed, and I was still at my desk, reorganizing donation ledgers. My eyes burned, my shoulders ached, but something inside me felt calm, like I was finally doing something that mattered. I didn't hear him walk in. I only felt the air shift. He set down a takeout container beside my elbow. "You haven't eaten." I looked up, startled. He wore no tie, his sleeves rolled up, the scar at his wrist just visible in the low light. "Thank you," I said, touched. "You didn't have to." "Neither did you," he said, gesturing at the work. We sat in silence, eating from paper boxes, like two strangers learning how to be something more. Out of nowhere, he asked, "What would you have done if I hadn't stopped you in the garage?" I swallowed. That moment still lived in my chest like a bruise. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but at least I wouldn't have regretted how I left." He nodded, slow. "I've made a lot of people leave," he said quietly. "Most of them never looked back." I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time I didn't see a CEO. I saw a man haunted by how easily he could be left, and how surprised he was that I didn't. We didn't talk much after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what we were building didn't need words. It just needed time. And space. And silence. Sometimes he'd walk by my desk, pause, and say nothing. Sometimes I'd leave a sticky note on his tablet, with nothing more than a quote or a thought or a quiet "good luck today." And in those small, almost invisible ways, we stitched something between us. It was soft. It was something neither of us had ever had before. One night as we left the office together, not planned, just he held the elevator door open for me. He stood aside, not speaking. The lights flickered. The elevator hummed. And then so quietly I almost missed it, he said, "You were never small." I turned toward him. Our eyes met. And for once, he didn't look away. It would not put. I didn't deflect. He nodded. He whispered, "The door is open." We stepped into the night. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. It felt like I was walking toward it. Chapter 8. When the woman calls. I hadn't been to a job fair since before everything. Before Rentec. Before the mistake. Before the man in the charcoal suit who watched without speaking and somehow still made me feel known. But there I was, back among the folding tables and name tags, the rows of eager smiles and clipboards filled with hope. Not as a job seeker this time. As a representative. I stood behind a small booth labeled Rentec Foundation Community Outreach. The banner fluttered gently in the warm draft of the convention hall air. My hands smoothed over the tablecloth. I arranged the pamphlets, checked the pens, smiled at strangers, and waited. People didn't know me here. Not like they did in the office. Here I was just another face behind a logo. And maybe that was the point. To build something without being watched. To matter without being known. Around mid-morning a woman stopped by, early 40s, hair pulled back, tired eyes. She glanced at the materials, then at me. "You're with Rentec?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, "the foundation side. We partner with local schools and education nonprofits." He nodded slowly. "I'm the principal at Elston Elementary. We lost funding last year. Arts, music." Something tightened in my chest. I reached into the binder beside me, pulled out a card. "We're building a grant list now," I told her. "You can apply directly. Here." And she took it with both hands. She held it like something rare. "Thank you," she said, eyes glassy. "No one ever really listens when it's just kids who are losing." "I do," I said. "Saw." She looked at me then. Really looked. And in that second, I wasn't just someone behind a table. It was someone who'd been on the other side of the loss. We saw it, and she nodded. After she left, I sat down, and I let myself feel it. The full weight of how far I'd come, not upward, not high up, but inward, back into myself. I stayed long after the crowd thinned out, packed up slowly, made sure nothing was left behind. It was only when I turned to leave that I saw him. With anger, leaning against the far wall, hands in his pockets, watching. I don't know how long he'd been standing there. He didn't move. He waved. He what? And for I felt. He walked toward him, still holding a stack of brochures. You don't usually show up to these, I said lightly. He shrugged. Didn't come for the fair. He raised an eyebrow. No? No, he said. Came for you. The way he said it, simple, direct, without decoration, made something skip in my chest. He walked in silence toward the parking lot. It wasn't awkward anymore, that silence. It felt like breathing. You were good today, he said after a moment. You looked. I felt it, I admitted. He glanced sideways at me. You're not the same girl I hired. He smiled faintly. Is that a good thing? I think so. He nodded thoughtfully. You in the end added. He walked through the fire and didn't come out angry. That's rare. I looked at him. The man who had once watched me kneel by a car and said nothing. The man who had taught me, unintentionally, that not all silence is cruelty. Some silence is grief. Some silence is reverence. Some silence is waiting for the right words. I used to think showing up meant being loud, I said softly. He tilted his head. And now I think it just means not hiding. We stopped near the curb, cars passed, horns honked. The world moved on. And we just stood there, in the middle of it. Yo, sure. I turned to him. Thank you for letting me come back. He looked at me, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. You didn't come back, Leah. You wrote. I don't remember the drive home that night, only the feeling. It wasn't climbing anymore. It was already where I needed to be. The next morning there was a note on my desk. No envelope, no signature. Just 5 words, handwritten in familiar slanted print. You never had to shrink. And below that in smaller letters, I see ya. I read it 3 times. But I folded it slow and tucked it into my wallet. Not because I needed the reminder, but because someday someone else might. Chapter 9. The coffee shop. We never made a plan to meet. It would just happen. The way some people just appear on rainy days. Soft, unexpected, as if the clouds opened for them and no one else. He was already there when I arrived, tucked into the farthest corner of the little coffee shop I'd come to rely on for warmth and quiet in the chaos. No bodyguards, no assistant, just a man in a black wool coat with his sleeves rolled, steam curling from a ceramic mug in front of him. He didn't look like a CEO that morning. He looked like someone waiting. And when his eyes met mine, calm, steady, completely unshocked to see me, I knew he had been. I slid into the seat across from him. No words at first. Just the smell of roasted beans, rain against the windows, and the kind of silence that doesn't demand to be filled. He broke it first. You always come here on Saturdays. Ole Bayaski Kushaba. Only when I need to breathe, I answered. He smiled softly. So, every Saturday. What you got? Because he was right. There was a small notebook on the table. His pen rested on the edge of it. The pages were filled with numbers, outlines, things crossed out and circled again. His handwriting was precise, almost surgical, but I could see it had changed over time. More margin notes, fewer equations. A little mess where perfection used to be. You were working on the education initiative, I asked, nodding to it. He shook his head. Whereabouts? He didn't press. And he didn't offer. but he pushed the notebook slightly in my direction. Just enough for me to see one line scrawled near the top of the page. What makes a home, and what keeps someone from leaving it? I looked up at him, and he looked back. Like maybe, just maybe, I had the answer to a question he'd never asked aloud. He stood suddenly. "Come on," he said. "What?" I followed him out into the street, the rain light and fine like breath. He rolled my hand, but he didn't walk ahead either. He moved side by side, until we reached a bookstore. Small, independent, tucked between a flower shop and a boarded-up jazz bar. He pulled open the door for me, and he stepped inside a world that smelled like ink and old stories. He walked straight to the back, to a shelf labeled Unsent Letters. Not a genre, not a section, just a collection of books people had written but never published. "I come here when I forget what matters," he said, running a finger along the spine of one of them, "to remind myself that not all value is tied to being seen." I turned to face him. "Bring me here." He looked at me for a long time, because I wanted to sit beside someone who knows what it's like to not be chosen, and still show up. My chest tightened. "I never needed to be chosen," I whispered. "I just needed not to be discarded." He nodded. "That's the difference between love and power, isn't it?" We stayed there for hours, regretting in silence, sitting on the floor with backs against the shelves like teenagers with nowhere to be. And in that quiet space, surrounded by words no one ever published, he reached over. Not to hold my hand, but to brush his knuckle gently against mine. A soft, fleeting touch. A promise that didn't need language. And I leaned my shoulder just slightly closer, because sometimes closeness isn't about distance. It's about intention. When the shop owner turned the lights down for closing, we didn't rush to leave. We stood at the door together. Outside, the rain had stopped, and everything smelled like beginning. "I should go," I said, not moving. "You should up." Still, we stayed. Finally, he turned to me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to, because what he did next said everything. "Not go yet. Just a look. One that lingered. The one that asked, not demanded up on it." And I smiled. Not a big smile, not one made for other people. A small one. "Next Saturday?" I asked. "I'll be here," he said, voice low. "What if I'm late?" I went, and somehow I believed him. Later, as I lay in bed, I opened my journal, and I wrote just one sentence. He doesn't promise loudly, but when he does, it sounds like trust. Chapter 10. The day the elevator stopped. It wasn't supposed to be a special day. No big meetings, no headlines, just a Thursday, gray and unremarkable. The kind of day that slips by unnoticed unless something inside you remembers it for what it became. I was running late. Not dramatically, just enough to be annoyed at myself. The kind of late where you skip breakfast, forget your umbrella, and pray the elevator arrives before the rest of the building does. I stepped inside as the doors began to close, only to see a hand reach out and stop them. He stepped in. I hadn't seen him in 3 days. He'd been traveling. New York, I'd heard. A conference, a meeting, some negotiation that would make or break something powerful. But now he was here, and the elevator, once moving, jolted gently to a stop. We both glanced up. The lights flickered. The panel went dark. And the elevator... "You've got to be kidding me," I said under my breath. He didn't speak, just leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, that unreadable expression slipping into something almost amused. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, "just wondering how long the universe has been waiting to trap us in a box together." He laughed. It came out too fast, too loud, nervous. He smiled. Really smiled. The kind that stays in the corners of someone's eyes. We waited in silence. A few minutes passed. No movement, no rescue. It was just us, trapped between two floors. The glaben steel box with nothing to do but feel everything we'd been avoiding. He looked down at my hands. He looked directly at me. "You've changed," he said quietly. "I don't think I have," he admitted. "Then maybe you're just becoming more of who you already were." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "You used to be all business, efficient, distant. Now you bring people coffee and stand in the rain and wait in bookstores for women who haven't told you how they feel yet." The silence thickened. He didn't argue. He just, not enough to invade, just enough to matter. "Leah," he said, voice low. "What do you feel?" The question wasn't forceful. It wasn't dramatic. It was obvious, and that's what made it hard to answer. I pressed a hand to the elevator wall. My voice came small. "I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something good, and I'm afraid to ruin it." "You don't know that, I do." He stepped forward just one pace, and his hand reached out, not to hold mine, but to lift my chin so our eyes met. "Because I don't fall for people who perform. I fall for people who kneel by cars when no one's looking, who show up when they've been counted out, who whisper instead of shout and still move the world." I couldn't breathe. Not fully. But for the first time in years, I wasn't suffocating either. The elevator hummed. Lights flickered again. Then, with a soft chime, the doors opened. He stood there in the open space. The world waiting. But neither of us stepped out. "You don't have to love me today," he said gently. "Just don't walk away from the chance to." I looked at him, at everything this moment meant. It had promised, everything it had healed in me without even asking permission. And it won't work. He smiled. "Good." And just before we stepped into the hallway, I reached for his hand. Not because I needed to hold it, but because I finally wanted to. That night, we didn't go out. We didn't dress up. We didn't post or announce or declare. We just sat in the coffee shop after hours, with the lights low and a single candle flickering between us. And when he finally leaned in, his lips barely brushing mine, he didn't ask for more. He simply whispered. And he whispered back, "Thank you for seeing me." There's a moment in every woman's life, a split second, when she realizes no one is coming to save her. For Leah Monroe, that moment happened between the 34th and 35th floors of a downtown Chicago skyscraper. The elevator lights buzzed overhead. Her fingers, still smudged with ink from rewriting her resume that morning, clutched a thrift store handbag. Her lips get too red, her shoes too scuffed, and her blouse wrinkled in all the wrong places. She didn't belong here. Everyone had made that clear the second she stepped through the revolving doors of Rentec Industries. She was 26, jobless, in debt, raised by a grandmother who believed that grace could still buy a second chance. And maybe it could. Maybe that's why Leah had shown up, wearing borrowed courage and a trembling heart, for a job she had no business getting. "You're the 12th secretary," the woman at reception said with a smirk. "The last one had a master's from Yale." She cried on her second day. Leah had scowled, not because she wasn't scared, but because smiling was the only armor she had left. By the time she reached the 35th floor, the air smelled of filtered well. But then he entered. Mathango Wren, CEO. Billionaire, a man known across the Midwest for building a tech empire from silence and discipline. They said he hadn't smiled in 5 years, that his last assistant left the country, that his heart was made of bulletproof glass. And yet, he paused when he saw her. He didn't speak, neither did he. But his gaze lingered, not on her skirt, not on her face, on the way she stood, like a girl trying not to shake. "Monroe?" he asked, glancing at his assistant's clipboard. "Yes, sir." You're in the train. "I'm sorry." "You apologize. Just don't do it again." And with that he turned and walked into his office. But that one glance, That one look had seen more of her than anyone in that building ever would. The job wasn't glamorous. She was given the smallest desk, near the printer, a phone with one broken key, and a wardrobe critique every morning from Eliza Brandt, the deputy manager with sharp nails and a sharper tongue. Curfew is banned. No more red lipstick. Skirts below the knee, Monroe. This is Rentec, not a roadside diner. Leah never argued. She just nodded, lowered her eyes, and did her work. She organized files like they were sacred, fetched coffee like it was an honor, and memorized the executive schedule like it was gospel. What no one noticed was that someone had noticed her. Nathaniel Wren never said much, but Leah began to notice small things. Her tasks were being reassigned, the demeaning ones handed to others. When Eliza mocked her in meetings, he'd cut in with a single glance, and Eliza would quiet like a scolded child. One afternoon, after a department head laughed at her second-hand shoes, she found a small box beneath her desk. A new pair, simple and elegant. No note, just silence. And yet the silence began to speak. He started arriving early, staying late not for approval but for pride. And slowly something changed. Nathaniel began giving her more responsibility. A draft of a private memo here, a client report there. She never made mistakes. Until she did. It was a Friday. Raining hard. Leah had stayed up the night before taking care of her grandmother, who'd had a fall. She'd barely made it to work. Her mind blurred from worry and no sleep. And she lost it. The confidential file, a marketing strategy for Rentec's newest partnership, vanished from her desk. By noon, Eliza was screaming. By 1:00 p.m., Nathaniel had said nothing. Just a single line. "You may leave your badge at the desk." It wasn't anger in his voice. It was something worse. Disappointment. She walked out of that building in the same cheap shoes she walked in with, but this time, no one met her eyes. But she didn't cry. He just went home. That night, Leah couldn't sleep. Not because of the job, not even because of the humiliation, but because she had made a promise. To him. He had bought her clothes, given her shelter, dignity, not affection, not romance, but something rarer. And she had failed him. So the next morning she returned, not with a resume, not with a new suit, but with a rag, a bucket of water, and a quiet resolve. He knelt beside his car in the corporate garage and began to clean it. Word spread fast. By noon, executives whispered. Receptionists gawked. "Isn't that Monroe? What if she did?" Scrubbing his car. But she didn't stop. Not even when her hands bled. Not even when Elisa sneered. How pathetic. Nathaniel. He stood behind the glass, silent, watching her, not moving, not breathing. And in that silence, something inside him shattered. The woman who stayed. They never had a grand wedding. No candlelit proposal on a balcony in Paris. No viral photo shoot or champagne toasts. Just a woman in flats who showed up to work every morning. And a man who once thought silence was strength, until her silence taught him how to feel again. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain. No crowd clapping as they finally held hands. Only the quiet hum of an elevator. And two people who chose to stay inside long enough to speak their truth. Nathaniel never became warmer. He still walked with permit. Still dressed like thunderclouds in $1,000 suits. But to Leah, he was the man who once stood beside her as the world tried to humiliate her, and said nothing because he believed in her when she couldn't speak for herself. And he no longer wore red lipstick to prove anything. He wore it because she liked the way it made her feel. Bold, alive, quietly powerful. He didn't stay in the city to be a wife. He stayed because she had found something she thought didn't exist anymore. A place where love didn't ask her to shrink. A love that never clapped for her, but always stood behind her. They say the world rewards those who are loudest. But sometimes, it's the woman who kneels beside a car with scraped knees and soft hands, who changes everything. Not with rage. Not with grace. Not with noise, but with the unshakable dignity of someone who remembers who she is, even when everyone else forgets. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever loved quietly, if you've ever walked through something alone and still chose kindness, then this story is yours. And maybe like Leah, you know what it means to stay. We'd love to hear your story. Not the perfect one, the real one. And Cadence. Had he ever chosen dignity over pride? Had he ever kept your word when no one was watching? Have you ever loved quietly? Leave a comment below. Not for views, not for likes, but so someone else scrolling by might see it and think, maybe I'm not alone after all. It was for he. Thank you for staying until the end. We say you, and we're so glad you're here.